Welcome to The Teaching Curve, a podcast exploring the pedagogy of global politics and international studies. Produced under the auspices of the Innovative Pedagogy Initiative of the International Studies Association and made available through ISA's Professional Resource Center. I'm Jamie Free, Associate Provost and Professor of Global Politics at Bridgewater College. Coming to you today from a disused conference room at the International Studies Association Convention in Nashville, Tennessee. This is our first live taped episode. The Teaching Curve presents conversations with thoughtful and innovative teachers of international studies. The goal is to celebrate and inspire pedagogical creativity by having scholars describe the choices they have made as they have responded to the challenges of balancing the many aspects of our profession to embody good teaching, finding ways to help others make sense of the complexities we as a discipline embrace. Today's conversation is with Dr. Andrew Szarejko and Dr. Sibel Oktay. Andrew is a Donald R. Beall Defense Fellow in the Defense Analysis Department at the Naval Postgraduate School. Sibel is an Associate Professor of Political Science and Global Studies and Director of the School of Politics and International Affairs at the University of Illinois Springfield in the United States. Andrew is the editor and Sibel a contributor to Pandemic Pedagogy, Teaching International Relations Amid COVID-19, published this year from Palgrave Macmillan. Our conversation covers lessons from the adaptations we all had to make to respond to the disruptions of the COVID pandemic, how disciplinary organizations can help support their members in the face of such disruptions, and how we manage the demands of our profession to make the space to invest in being good teachers. So Andrew Szarejko and Sibel Oktay, welcome to the Teaching Curve podcast. This is the first one we're doing in person because we're all here at the International Studies Association conference together in Nashville, and it's a very exciting thing. So I hope you get that electric spark is coming through the video when you're watching this. So we're here because the two of you, Andrew is the editor and Sibel has the chapter in the book, a new book, Pandemic Pedagogy, that's just out from Palgrave Macmillan. And we're going to talk a little bit about what they learned through the process and what they have to share with us about that. But first, I want you guys to please tell us a little bit about where you are, what institutions you are. As we know, the reason we can call ourselves teachers is because we have this mutually constitutive relationship with our students. So please talk about your experience with students and where you are right now in your institutions.
Yeah, so I'm at the Naval Postgraduate School now. I'm a postdoctoral fellow there. So I actually don't have any teaching responsibilities this year. I will say the year that I spent previously at the University of Cincinnati, I was a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science there. I was teaching 3 courses per semester, Intro to Comparative Politics, as well as several kind of IR and national security related upper level electives. And so I had a lot more sustained engagement with students there. We were doing all virtual classes due to the pandemic, but the kind of diversity of the students there and the kind of enthusiasm that they showed despite the circumstances of the pandemic, that's something that's going to stick with me.
Excellent. Sibel.
Yeah, my name is Sibel Oktay. I'm an associate professor of political science and formerly chair, now director of the School of Politics and International Affairs at the University of Illinois at Springfield. My university can be classified as a public master's level institution. So we have both online and on-ground degrees in this school for political science, both at the graduate and undergraduate levels. And so I've had plenty of online teaching experience prior to COVID, which was, I think I consider that a strength as we had to pivot quickly and somewhat clumsily during the pandemic. My students are mostly American students. I do have some international students, some exchange students, but for the most part, we're talking about students from within, either Illinois or elsewhere in the U.S. I do have quite a bit of students who are also stationed internationally. So especially in our online degree programs, we have a lot of students who are serving in the military. And so they might be posted in places like Erbil in northern Iraq, or Montenegro, or other places. And so I have a diverse student body in that sense.
So let's talk about the book first. What's the, tell me more about what's the idea behind the book, and what the chapters are and how it kind of came together.
Yeah, so to put the book in the temporal context, I pitched this in March of 2020. So when it was clear that there was going to be at least some short-term disruption to higher education from COVID-19, but the medium, long-term impacts were still a bit unclear. So it started off being pitched a bit more as kind of teaching in times of disruption, a bit broader, because we didn't know how long or how bad COVID would be necessarily. It really came eventually to focus in on COVID-19 and the process of teaching specifically during this pandemic. It was in March of 2021 that I ultimately received everyone's first draft. So we were very much writing in the thick of it, going through the first full academic year that would be impacted by COVID. And so I think that means there's a degree of humility to the book. We were writing from a place of real uncertainty, to be sure. But to kind of outline the book a bit, it's divided into 3 different sections. The first one really focuses in on the ways in which we've adapted our courses to especially online and hybrid modes of instruction. The second section focuses in on the question of how do we care for students in crisis, sometimes intersecting crises. And then the third part of the book is a bit more forward-looking and asks, how should we prepare for future disruptions? How do we make sure that we are caught a bit less off guard the next time something like this happens, and that we're kind of more prepared to make a shift to short or long-term online or hybrid instruction. And it's that third section of the book that Sibel's chapter is in, so I should turn it over to her.
Yes, so Andrew kindly invited me to be a part of this volume, which I of course jumped at the idea. I come in towards the end of the book, and my chapter comes in toward the end of the book, and I really enjoyed writing it because it comes from a place of experience, but also experience as an online teacher prior to COVID, as an online teacher during COVID, but also as someone who, by that point, I was picking up some administrative duties. So, you know, I've been serving on the FBA section. I should do a plug for that.
Sure.
And we just broke the 1,000 member mark. So we are the, thank you. So that's, I'm pretty proud of that.
Say just for everybody what FBA is.
Oh, Foreign Policy Analysis. We're now the second largest section of the, we have always been, but now we're one of the 2 sections that have more than 1,000 members. So I'm very proud of that.
That's good.
But you know, all of that those experiences as a department administrator and as, you know, someone who serves to the section, I was given, thanks to Andrew, this sort of free rein to think about, okay, how can we think more creatively about the role of these associations and the roles of these, you know, institutions and departments to make sure that next time, and you know, you hope this never happens, but it may not be a pandemic, it might be a power outage like the one we had in Texas, right? So these kinds of disruptions happen all the time. There's no way of stopping them, and how to make those disruptions less disruptive on our teaching and less stressful for our faculty and ultimately for our students. So in the chapter, and I can go, you know, talk a little bit in more detail about the kinds of examples that I draw on to make those to make those creative ideas, you know, in the chapter, but also, you know, what we can do in the future and how we can bring in what I call, you know, harnessing institutional support and association support for the next disruption.
So yeah, tell us one thing that you put in there that you think that the associations can do that would get out information that would help people in such disruptions.
Right. With ISA already has a number of initiatives in place, right? So we collect syllabi from members. I know FPA, Foreign Policy Analysis, has its own syllabi initiative, and we try to collect and we try to present them online on our website. So those are like the very little sort of tiny baby steps of providing these kinds of resources for folks who may never have taught comparative foreign policy or U.S. foreign policy or foreign policy analysis, and they want to start somewhere. And so the section in ISA's repository is a great way to do that.
Yeah.
Journals, one of the things that I was talking about in the chapter was about how we can think about modules for our online courses and video lectures and things like that, as opposed to sitting in front of your camera and sort of cracking out the next 90 minutes lecture. You can think of them as modules, short bursts of videos, and you can play with them, right? So you can use that module for another lecture, or if you're talking, if some other professor is teaching on that particular topic, they can borrow your module and present that. That creates a nice cross-pollination for students. They get to know me talking about foreign policy in an international law class, and so on and so forth. So ISA's journals have some of that functionality, maybe I could call it that, already in place in the form of like abstract videos. So whenever, I don't know for like whether it's done for all the articles that are being published or just some of them. I'm assuming that it's just a few, but there's no reason why we shouldn't do more of that. The authors, they record a 5-minute blurb on what the project is about, and it's a little more interactive than reading the abstract. And if you want to put faces on the papers that you're reading, it's a good way to do it.
Right.
And so those things can be brought into the lectures, into our courses, and our content, our course modules can be brought to the ISA repositories. And so I think there's a lot of creative ways in which we can make things happen. It just requires a lot more support and organization.
For a junior career scholar, early career scholar, for someone like myself, I was teaching 5 new preps at the University of Cincinnati. Syllabus repositories were a lifesaver for me, and kind of getting a kind of multiple points of reference for how other people were teaching these topics, some of which I had more familiarity with, some of which I didn't know always.
Fair enough.
So I really do want to underscore that.
You both have demonstrated, both through the book and your lives, that teaching is an investment. It's not just something that you some people are born to do, and therefore they don't have to work at it at all. Everybody has to work at their teaching, and so how do you decide how to invest energy in teaching, balancing that with the other responsibilities that go along with being a faculty member?
Well, like Sibel, I started teaching my own courses while I was still a PhD candidate at Georgetown. My first course as instructor of record was the summer of 2019. It was a similar kind of compressed course. It was 4 days a week for, I think, 5 weeks for us. And so I taught Introduction to IR at Georgetown in that format in 2019, 2020, 2021 again. In all those courses at Georgetown, right, I was very conscious of the need to finish my dissertation, do other research as well. I also have a personal life, right? I have a wife with whom I would like to spend some time.
Indeed.
I don't have any more serious caregiving responsibilities that I know can be a heavy burden for some. I think in terms of kind of how to allocate time to those different things, especially as a PhD candidate, but even then as a visiting assistant professor at Cincinnati, I think the main thing for me was to be very careful in setting boundaries and to really block off set amounts of time for teaching related work. And that's all the stuff related to teaching. So both giving the lectures or hosting the discussions, grading papers or essays, meeting with students in office hours, preparing new slides and revisiting old slides. All that stuff is stuff that would go into a teaching block for a single day for me usually. So I would try to keep office hours typically around the same time as my regular class, either before or after. And I would allocate other time kind of before or after that block for the rest of those kind of teaching related activities. So I would often spend a good amount of time on those things, especially at Cincinnati, teaching 3 courses per semester. That was, my sole contractual responsibility then was teaching, and so I think it was the right thing to do to be spending a good amount of time there on my teaching, making sure that my students were feeling supported in that environment and getting their money's worth. But I think it really did come down to me in all those settings to a matter of setting boundaries, saying I'm not going to respond to emails between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. or something along those lines. Yes, I'll try to get back to students promptly, but there are certain times when I'm not going to be doing course-related things. That was really important for me.
Sibel, because you have, in addition to teaching and research stuff, but you've got administrative duties as well.
Yes.
How do you decide to not just divvy up that time, but how to invest in your teaching so that you continue to grow in that respect?
Right. I wish I had a great answer to that, but I don't. Let me start with the easier part where I used to do what Andrew used to do, right? And one of my colleagues, which at UIS in my department, he told me one time, I think it was my very first semester at UIS, and he said, teaching is like water. It will fill up whichever container you give it and allocate it to. And so if you bring a bathtub, it's going to fill the bathtub. If you bring a small glass, it's going to fill a small glass. And so you have to decide how big a container you want, and that's going to, because otherwise it can take your entire day. And that is so true, because the first semester, and like Andrew said, I mean, I had a 3-3 load starting at UIS, and I have all these new preps that I need to work on. And so how do you do that without, first of all, without going crazy, but at the same time, while maintaining a nice, work-life balance, while working on your scholarship and just generally be a sane, normal person along the way. So what I tried to do was spend 3 days of the week on teaching related things. So everything from doing the readings, grading, office hours, creating lectures, delivering the lectures. And then generally for the longest time I had Thursdays and Fridays sort of blocked out, and I would just go to a coffee shop and write and read and work on my projects and scholarship. And so that worked out really fine for a good amount of time, which I'm very grateful for. And then I became an administrator, and then everything went sideways. That's, I'm gonna give out a whole bunch of advice that I cannot follow. But on Twitter, people say, I'm becoming chair next semester. What advice you have for me? And I sort of crack my knuckles, like, oh well, do I have advice for you? So it's teaching in institutions like mine, especially where we're considered teacher scholars, as opposed to, let's say, an R1 where you're judged primarily by your research output. We have to make sure that teaching is central. But given the kind of work that you're doing as an administrator, teaching becomes still a primary thing that you do, obviously. But in terms of the amount of time you spend on it, it starts to get eaten by all sorts of admin duties. And so it's imperative that you, again, like if it was 3 days and now that you have several course releases to get this administrative service, then you should still spend like a day that is nothing but your teaching, and you still because you're still an instructor, you're still a professor, and you are still judged by how good a teacher you are, how effective you are in the classroom, and you're morally and contractually bound to that work. So that's what I try to do as much as I can, and I generally spend my Mondays on my coursework, and then I put out fires for the rest of the week.
Fair enough. So let me ask you a little bit more about how that manifests, how that investment in your teaching manifests in kind of a larger kind of philosophy of what you're trying to get into the course. So besides content, what is it that you're hoping your students take away from your courses?
So for me, I think it's a kind of pluralistic sensibility. And here, the work of Patrick Thaddeus Jackson has been especially influential for me. His book on the conduct of inquiry and international relations. I think what I want to provide my students in an Intro to IR class, especially, but any course, is a sense that we don't need to come to the end of the course having declared a winner. Right? A single kind of theory or method that is the kind of one true way to truth in world politics. I really want them to come away with an appreciation for the diversity of approaches that we can take to the many problems of world politics.
Great.
Yeah, so for me, I think I'm interested in 2 or 3 core goals that I try to build in all of my courses. And I tell them, like, first thing in that first class, these are the things that I'm gonna keep emphasizing for the rest of the semester. And one of those is, there's a systematic way of studying politics, right? It's especially in this sort of current moment where a lot of it is about he said, she said, and a lot of people, for good and bad reasons, come to class with a lot of cynicism about politics and institutions and politicians and institutions. And so it's important to say that, besides all that noise, or in the middle of that noise, there is a way in which we can think about how factors shape each other, how they lead to certain types of outcomes, how there are frameworks that we can utilize to make sense of the chaos that we're living in. And I think that's something that I would want to communicate throughout the courses, essentially every week of our content. The second thing is, and relatedly, is that what you're learning in the classroom resonates with what's happening outside, like as we speak, right? Yeah. And political science is a wonderful discipline because politics is everywhere, right? It's about how this place is organized. And so when they are reading something about Middle East politics or US foreign policy, they can turn on the news, they can, go online and read newspapers, and hopefully they will find out that some of the discussions that we had in the classroom, they connect pretty nicely to what's happening on that day in here or elsewhere in the world. And so as long as they can make that connection, I can help them make that connection or give them the tools to be able to make those connections. I think that's a day that I won. So.
Well, and what's interesting about that, of course, is that that's about turning them into agents of their own understanding. Like, right. You are teaching them to see those connections. It's not necessarily that they need a professor then from then on to be able to make those connections right. for them. You're giving them broader skills to be able to go and do that for themselves, which is, of course, a very important component of being a citizen of a democracy.
Precisely.
Yeah. Well, thank you two both for sharing your wisdom with us. Let's plug the book again. This is a new volume out from Palgrave Macmillan, and it's about what you can learn from disrupted classrooms and spaces and how people use their creativity as instructors and as teachers to be able to make that stuff adapt into classrooms and make them more fully engaged for students. And those kinds of lessons are things that can go on despite disruptions. You can take them and adapt them to classes and courses even if you're just in normal times, which we hope everyone will be getting back to and fully engaged in those from now on.
Yeah.
But there's no guarantees. So anyway, thank you both very much for coming and being part of this.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much.
Teaching Curve podcast is made available through the ISA Professional Resource Center through the auspices of the Innovative Pedagogy Initiative. You can send feedback or suggestions for future interviews to teachingcurve@isanet.org or follow us on Twitter @teachingcurve. Thanks everybody for joining us again on the Teaching Curve, this time from a very special context. And remember, learn something every time you teach.